Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. This Black History Month, a Raleigh family is seeing their beloved aunt's story play out on the movie screen. Millie Dunn Veasey was a civil rights activist here in her hometown, but before that, she was a part of the only all-black U.S. Women's Army Corps unit during World War II. If that sounds familiar, Netflix released a movie about her battalion late last year. WRAL's Destinee Patterson is introducing you to Veasey's family tonight on WRAL News. Destinee, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It's such a cool story. And for people who maybe haven't seen this movie, who were the women of 6888 and what did they do during the war effort?
Well, I know that now we don't really rely on mail the way that we once did, but at one point that was the way to communicate. And during World War II, they were having this huge backlog of mail. And so family members were not able to get in contact with soldiers. And so there was this, it was affecting morale, and it was like a missing link.
Mm-hmm.
And so they brought on the 6888 to go overseas. They were the first, mostly black. They were part of the Women's Army Corps to go overseas and take on this huge undertaking. They were given 6 months to go through all of this mail, identify where this mail was supposed to go, and they did it in half the time. So really incredible, and they kind of lay the groundwork again for, post offices everywhere and getting your mail.
Yeah, and we were talking before we started the podcast about watching the movie and what a compelling story this is. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. And even cooler that we do have a woman who served in that battalion that is from here in Raleigh. So how did you find out about Millie Dunn Veasey and her service?
So in a couple of ways. I mean, obviously the Netflix movie really brought their struggles and their triumphs to the forefront for the whole world to see. But we have actually covered Millie Dunn Veasey in the past because she is a Raleigh native and she did have such a big impact. And I think that the movie kind of brought forth kind of the urgency to really bring that full story to light and really tell the story of what she and her other soldiers did during their service. In addition to that, and I know we're going to dive into this a little bit later, there's now a post office in Raleigh that recognizes her. So there were a lot of reasons to bring her story back to the forefront and really give her the recognition that she deserves.
Once you found out about her and started doing your research, you were able to talk to her family. So what did her family say about her time in the Army and just who she was as a person?
I think the most interesting piece to me and the part of her family story that surprised me the most was they really didn't understand the full scope themselves of what Millie Dunn Veasey went through, and again, the rest of her soldiers.
I did not know, and I don't think any of us really knew what this meant until I didn't realize it until the movie came out. She never talked about it. I think my nephew used to question her. She never would talk about it. So I don't know. I consider that being humble. I don't think maybe she didn't want to talk about it because it was so devastating to her, and she maybe internalized a lot of it. I don't know, because she never talked about it. I wish she were here today so we could talk about it. If we had known some of this, perhaps we could have had some discussions, because her house was the family house. We would gather there for cookouts, for meals, for everything. And if we had known this could have been a discussion point for us, but we didn't know.
And I just thought that was so astounding, having this, huge pillar of civil rights and the military service in your family, and still not really understanding the full scope of what that means. So we talked a lot about that. And they also talked with me about how she was a speed demon on the road. That was like one thing that all of them brought up. They were like, she always liked to drive fast.
When visiting Washington, D.C., we would be in the car with Auntie Dear, the speedster, who could not stand for a truck, a car, anything to pass her. Because if anything passed her, hey, you better watch out, because she was going to pass them. And I never could understand why we were in the car with her. And she was driving like a pure D nut. And but that was the way she was. She got us where we were going safely. But it was always a thrill to be in the car with her.
You know, as she aged and got older, it was kind of ironic seeing her slow down a little bit. So, you know, we got to share some laughs, but they also were kind of just sharing again, like understanding the full scope and understanding how that then laid the groundwork of so many things that we see and do today.
Let's take a quick break right there. We'll be right back. So, Destinee, before the break, you were telling me that Millie Dunn Veasey's family kind of didn't know the full scope of her military service before this movie. But, you know, she comes back to Raleigh after her service, and I'm sure, you know, since they were, you know, all in the same place, maybe had a better idea of the accomplishments she had when it came to civil rights and just being in her community. So what was her life like after her military service?
She was one of those people that service was just a part of her. When she came back to Raleigh, she went to St. Augustine's University, also went to North Carolina Central University as well. And she also even went on to work for St. Aug. So she had some very deep St. Aug ties. And then she also became the first female president of the NAACP here in Raleigh. So that's super cool. And she was very involved in a lot of the civil rights movements and demonstrations that were happening during the time. She helped organize different sit-ins and even got Martin Luther King Jr. to come to speak in Raleigh. So very instrumental. And when I spoke with her family, they also mentioned how important her sorority was to her. She was a part of Zeta Phi Beta. And, you know, I think that when she got back, like I said, she just had this heart of service.
And I had asked her, how did you do that? And she said, I just did it. She didn't have a rhyme or reason. She said that I felt like if this person could do it, then I could do it. And I think her strength also came from how much she loved the Lord. So she also found her strength in Jesus Christ. And then she was able to do the extraordinary, where we would, as a family, we would sit and my dad would say, sister's doing this, sister's doing that. Well, she was able because she just did it. She had the stamina and the strength. And as the oldest daughter, she was a leader of her family. She had her mother that she took care of, then her younger brothers and sisters. She just had the stamina. And I'm just grateful that she has set forth a legacy that give us strength today.
And so it just didn't stop. I mean, she lived to be 100 and was still, you know, doing things in her community.
Passed away in 2018, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep.
Okay. And so all of that, you know, just a life of service, so much achievement, so much change that she saw in her lifetime. And what was it like for her family to see this movie and see sort of a part of that maybe they didn't understand the full scope of?
Her nephew said something to me that really stuck with me. He said, you know, it really just shows all of the things that Black people had to endure and the way that Black people have persevered over the years.
Like, that's being lost in our community now, so that's what made me appreciate it a lot more, that it should instill in us to try to do more civic-minded type activities and ventures.
And one of her nieces, she said, she was like, I cried when I saw the movie.
The movie was wonderful, but yet it was sad in terms of all those women, how they were treated the substandard conditions that they lived in, the rats, the cold buildings, when they were on the boat being tossed to and fro, when they were on the train being tossed to and fro, and she was still able to do her job. And she still talked about with exuberance. She didn't share the negative portions. She just shared that she was able to do that. And I am so proud of her legacy.
What's interesting is she also laid the groundwork for many more of her descendants and her loved ones to get involved in the military as well. So even one of her nieces was saying, she was part of the reason why I was able to even, serve myself and, continue to push through when things got hard for me.
Yeah. And you mentioned before the break that she now has a post office here in Raleigh named after her. So what's that process like? What does the family feel like to know that there's this such a kind of a full circle moment with that?
Yeah. I mean, multiple of her nieces said to me, we're so grateful that she's getting this recognition, that people are finally seeing her legacy and finally even hearing about the 6888. But they also wish that she could be here to really take all of that in and also see how appreciated she really was.
Yeah. How are they reflecting on her lifetime and just all of the challenges that she overcame and the barriers that she broke down, not just for her own family, like you said, with some of them being inspired to military service, but the community and the country even?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like I was saying earlier, I think people learning and hearing about the 6888 is one of the most impactful things that came out of both the movie and the renaming of the post office, because it is one of those things where, again, you don't really think about mail like that anymore. But everything has to start somewhere. And I also think the fact that these women were able to persevere in a space where others were expecting and hoping for them to fail. So I think that there is this appreciation of knowing that, you can make a difference, even if at the time, you have to take the brunt of whatever that is.
Yeah. And is there anything that you took away from this that just was particularly impactful for you?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I think that for me, it makes you want to look at your own family members, and not necessarily even just Black history, but, like thinking about aging parents and grandparents and not fully even understanding their stories,
Right,
to them, we're niece, or granddaughter, and we don't actually take the time to sit down and ask them about some of the things that they went through. And I think one of the things that her family members had mentioned was they almost kind of think that in serving that she didn't want there to be any sort of negative connotation with her service. She didn't want people to necessarily think of her time and think, oh, rats and no heat. She wanted people to really just appreciate what was done. And I think that that humility is also a really big piece of this to take away as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And, in this time when we have phones and recorders in our pockets with cameras, like we can easily, sit down and have a conversation with our loved ones and find out those sort of oral histories. I think that's such a great point. It's such a great story. Thank you so much, Destinee, for telling it. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with triangled news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.